All right, friends, good evening and welcome. We are so glad that you're here with us tonight because we have a very special guest with us. We are honored to have Brett Packer here. So, for those of you that have not met Brett yet, first of all, let me just say he is amazing, and I would tell you that whether he was on here or not. Frank and I got the privilege of going to a winter harvest in January of 2020. And that's when we really got to spend some time with Brett and get to know him. And he's a great host, by the way. Like, he's amazing and has a really good sense of humor. Um, but let me tell you just a little bit about Brett. His official title is Executive Director of Young Living Farms, and that's globally, you guys. That is around the world. Brett started his Young Living Farm journey 17 years ago, working with Gary at the Finca Botanica farm in Ecuador, which happens to be my favorite farm so far. He worked in Ecuador directly with Gary on the details of regenerative soil fertility, aromatic crop production, distillation, and sharing the seed to seal experience. So this provided Brett with a life-changing experience to learn directly from the passionate creator of the standards that set Young Living apart from the rest of the world, the seed to seal quality commitment. Over the 17 years of working with Young Living Farms, Brett has had the opportunity to travel to the Young Living Farms across the globe, learning directly from Gary all of the things: crop production, distillation, and Gary's incredible personal approach to sharing all that is seed to seal with the world. So these experiences with Gary, the wonderful staff at Young Living Global Farms, and Young Living's amazing brand partners infused Brett with a passion that he has devoted to continuing Gary's mission to share the earth's purest essential oils with everyone. Brett, thank you for being with us tonight. We are so glad that you are here.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's always a pleasure every time I get a visit with you, and Frank is always a delight, truly. So thanks for having me. And we love doing this. We're always available to share our content. Um yeah, I mean it's been quite the journey, I'll say, And it started in Ecuador is when I first started working with for Young Living and Gary. And then I'm from Idaho, and so I transferred to the St. Mary's farm and was doing winter harvest there when Gary used to truck the chips from Highland Flats, and we distilled them at St. Mary's. And so that was anybody that experienced that era. It was something else. It really was, and it was all done in the dead of winter, and lots of really great stories and memories from that era. But then Gary started building the distillery at Highland Flats. That I eventually became the farm manager there, and I managed the Highland Flats farm for 7 years. So that's kind of you're not supposed to have a favorite kid or a favorite anything, but just like the Fink is your favorite farm, Highland Flats has been my favorite. And then, from there, I helped Gary develop the Northern Lights farm and train the crews and the crews in Croatia. And then, 5 years ago is when I got the position to be in management over all the farms. So it's an amazing job. I mean, I truly love it and feel like it's part of my own personal fate, and so I'm grateful for that. And we you'll hear me say this to the farm managers, but our favorite part of the job is actually when you come on site of the farms and get to experience it, on site. Get to have seed to still not become what could be a marketing slogan that you maybe don't fully understand all the values, because the values lead to the practices, if that makes sense. But when you come and experience it in detail, I mean, most of our events take a week to do, right? And you're looking at the regenerative ag practices, you're looking at the harvest and distillation. And then Gary had labs placed on all of his farms, so you see the analytics on site. And then we do usage of the oil too. And normally that's through a raindrop training or something like that, right? So it goes all the way from all the practices in seed to still to actual usage of the oil, which, is incredibly important, right? So yeah, I mean, but honestly, sharing that with people from around the world and that we all have these values in common And that to me, that's kind of the magic formula. So but if do we want to start the presentation now, and we can do questions afterwards too?
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
So I don't know if I should turn my camera off or not, or how the slides will best share, but Michael has a slide deck. I don't.
Okay.
For Mike's desktop, you can see he's busy. So, I mean, this is being recorded, but I still will be pretty open about certain kind of historical context items of Young Living, if you will. And those of you that have heard about Gary and kind of his like maverick pioneering spirit, or kind of like him being a rebel in certain regards, people are like, well, why don't Young Living products have organic certifications, and why at one point weren't the farms certified organic? And Gary was always opposed to anything he thought was maybe some kind of regulatory racket or anything like that. And he was like, why would I get the farm certified organic when we're so much better than organic and seed to sill? And I understand his perspective, and especially the way he saw things. But we started getting all the farms certified organic, and it was quite easy, right? If you talk to the farm managers about the process, I mean, we're so far beyond organic, especially with what I'd call holistic land management, right? And basically, in the simplest terms, it's basically turning your agricultural practices into a part of nature. There's not separation in nature systems and cycles on our farms. In that, the soils become living systems like you would have in nature, for the microbiome in soils and all the parts of like soil health and soil fertility. I have a funny thing I like to say. When you go out to a forest or a jungle, do you ever see a guy out there on a tractor fertilizing, doing laps? I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And so in nature, even a 1,000-year-old, 2,000-year-old forest, for the soil fertility just continues. Nature doesn't deplete herself. I mean, if like the Hong Kwai tree in Taiwan, it's 2,000 years old, and it continues to thrive and create an ecosystem around it. And so we mirror that in seed to sill agriculture. And I really see organics certification is like a really, really low threshold or baseline. But for people new to Young Living, or, just kind of almost like a third party verification or certification, I do find value in it. And I don't know if that's how you feel, or when you're approaching new people, if that's a value to you. And so if we can go to the next slide, please, Michael. Finca Botanica. So there's our logo. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll look at their certifications. So we can share all this with you too, and it's being recorded. What's interesting about the certifying bodies, though, I mean, we're in different countries around the world, so there's different options for what we can use as a certifying body. And so this is a pretty neat one. They do pretty good international work, or really good actually, and they're from Germany. And you see it's Kiwa, and so that's their certification. And if we go and it's USDA too, if you can see there on the bottom. If we go to the next slide, please. Highland Flats. Next slide. And we post all these too on site on the farms. So as you visit the farms, you can see these certifications there. So, this is a USDA one, and it's also with the state of Idaho. And there's different aspects of it too, because sometimes it's a wild crop. And I'll save this for when we get through the certifications, but we have some new ones we're looking into to further validate our standards and practices. We go next slide, Michael. St. Mary's, the original farm. So if we go next slide. So this is through the state of Idaho. Again, you can see it's USDA. And when Cody went through this process, he just couldn't believe with the inspector how low of a bar it actually is to clear being organic. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I like organic certifications when I buy food or different things. That's a baseline I look for myself. But there's so many other things that happen on our farms with positive environmental impact and being in harmony with nature. And so we'll get to that later. If we go next slide. There's another part of that. Next slide. So now we're in France. Next slide. So there's certifications there with a certifying body called EcoCert. And some of our other international farms and partner farms are also done through EcoCert. So if we go next slide again, please, Michael. There's some stuff in French. You can see their logo though on the top, EcoCert. And they're another really great certifying body. Next slide. Northern Lights Farm. Next slide. So this was different being in Canada, and so we found a certifying body called PAX. But again, that's these certifications, whether you're in Northern Lights or in France, we post them where people can take pictures of them and inspect them themselves. Next slide. Mount Nebo. And this is probably, our farm that gets the most traffic. Conventions happen there. The Silver Retreat's happening there right now. So this is through the state, the USDA. And we post that all over the farm too. Next slide, please, Michael. So you can look at these details a little closer with some of the analytics of the certification. Next slide, please. So then partner farms too. So this is EOAS Organics farm in Sri Lanka. The Diamond Retreat was just there. And you can look at all the different certifications they have. If we go next slide, Michael. But I mean, even here's more certifications for this partner farm. I was really impressed. I mean, even their name is EOAS or Organics, right? And during the Diamond Retreat, when we drove into their facility, literally on their gate in every building, everything says organic. And if a lot of positive impacts though from this farm, how they help the local community, how they educate about regenerative ag and how to turn soils back into living systems. They have a whole network of farmers they support. And they partnered with our foundation because they have a school for their employees. And in Sri Lanka, for a lot of them, it's the first time that, their parents didn't receive a formal education, but their kids now are being able to, go to their school, which is going to allow them to hopefully go to a university. And, during the Diamond Retreat, we actually visited their school there, and then I guess on that side too, those of you that have been to Finca, or maybe if Finca was your favorite farm, all about the academy we have there and the partnership with the foundation. And we have several of our farm employees that their kids have graduated from the foundation and now gone to college and became doctors and all kinds of wonderful things. And I mean, these are communities too where that just was not happening historically. So that's more of the part of the positive impact, and it's part of partners that provide these type of opportunities. It's absolutely amazing. We go next slide, Michael. These are more of theirs. They also have the EcoCert. They have several organic certifications. Kosher. Next slide, Michael. So then this is one of our main partner farms, and we have a really strong history with. So the Kona Reforestation Project and Distillery. If we go next slide, Michael. So there's their organic certification. Again, you can see this, they have the EcoCert certification that we have in France and Sri Lanka. They have the USDA certification. We go next slide, Michael. And so then now Hong Kwai in Taiwan, this partner farm too has a long history with this one that Gary started. I was just there last year doing a follow-up audit. And, that's, we do seed to sill audits on all these farms too. And so we continually have to, there's an annual cycle. Sometimes it's annual, sometimes it's every few years that we go revisit doing a site audit. So if we go next slide on Hong Kwai, can you see on the top, it says organic agricultural production verification certification. The rest is in Mandarin, but it's pretty amazing too. They're actually in this whole entire cooperative and community of organic farms. So even all the adjoining farms are all organic farms too. And the Hong Kwai, we have a special permit where, it is an endangered species, but it gets knocked off the really steep mountains in Taiwan. And we have a special permit to harvest driftwood. So it's really ethical. It's something we actually have to audit every other year and go back through their permits to harvest driftwood. So it's pretty special project. But they have a really large reforestation effort. And so they have nurseries, and part of that positive impact where you're giving back more than you're taking is that they're reforesting this endangered Hong Kwai tree all over Taiwan. Next slide, Michael. And so that's one area I feel like we really shine. Gary had such a love for evergreens and trees in general. And so when you look at all these different bottles of oil, whether it's the Hong Kwai in Taiwan or Hawaiian sandalwood, we have the new partnership we're able to establish in Brazil with the rosewood. All of these are actually reforestation efforts. And even though we are selectively harvesting trees, like with the Hawaiian sandalwood and the Palo Santo, it's the dead trees we harvest. But really though, these oils are the funding and the fuel for the reforestation. We have the cypress in Darwin. We have, at Highland Flats, there's years we planted up to 250,000 trees a year. So, that's one thing I really, really love about the positive impact beyond, the different certifications. And then speaking to the certifications, though, we're working on a list of additional certifications to gather for the farms. And one of them is the Forest Stewardship Council. And so we had members of the Forest Stewardship Council that works around the world rebuilding forests and forestry economies that are net positive. So even though you're using forestry products, it's completely documented that it's net positive, that it's rebuilding natural, healthy forests around the world. So that's another certification we'd like to layer on top of the organic certifications at these locations. So next slide, please, Michael. And so when you think about those bottles of oil being part of these positive impacts, here's a list, and we could make a much longer list, but besides an organic certification, all these oils and you sharing these oils, it helps promote and fund and fuel the regenerative agricultural practices that create the biodiversity that's found in nature, like a forest or a jungle. And if any of you've seen the Fair Wild certifications we have, which is for wildcrafting, we're actually working with Fair Wild to create their first ever certification for agriculture. And so one of the main criteria they had, because we'd be the first ever, because they've only historically done wildcraft supply chains, is that this agriculture actually creates biodiversity. And so if we were to talk about the biodiversity seed to sill agriculture creates, again, it starts all the way from the microbiome in the soil. And, a healthy tablespoon of topsoil should have 7 billion different microbes in it. It's actually the biggest living system on the earth is actually in the first 6 inches of topsoil. But then it creates a habitat for like the native pollinators. If you saw the work we've done on native pollinators, documenting that with Dr. Joseph Wilson. And so we had a really cool project where we documented in Provence first that our lavender fields had the same amount of endangered specialized native pollinators found in the meadows of the French Alps. And, there's a key distinction to, people are like, save the bees, and the bees, domestic honeybees, are an important indicator of different ecosystems health. But they're a domestic bee from Italy, and they're not, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but they're not too much different than cattle. And so with native pollinators, 80% of them, they do not live in hives. They actually burrow in the ground and live in solitary lives. So they're not a hive, pollinator. And so where we do the cover cropping, the no disc, no till agriculture, all of our farms, even our production fields, become habitats for native pollinators. And so we extended that research. And this year we did it at Mount Nebo, we did it at Highland Flats, and we did it at the Finca Botanica. And again, we were able to document that our farms have the same amount of these endangered specialized native pollinators as the neighboring, wildlife or forests, or, the nature around us. And, if you look at these pollinators, maybe you've seen like the ones that, it's called the proboscis, right? That piece of their anatomy that is specialized for certain flowers. And there's certain pollinators that are specialized. Only one pollinator can pollinate this certain flower or certain, tree that has a flowering tree, etc. So it's incredibly important, beyond supporting domestic bees, that these endangered pollinators have habitat. Um, another part of it, which we could go in really depth in, and we built posters too. I don't know if you got to see those at convention, but we actually have real images with really specialized photography of all the specialized pollinators that our farms are habitats for. And so we should have had that on the slide, sorry, but we can get that to you too. And we can keep on working on this presentation and send it back to you, because all the organic certifications I could get from all the partner farms and all of our farms, I was just trying to do a quick overview for tonight. But if that's of interest, we could put the whole package together. Because like, the farm in Morocco for rosemary, the farm in South Africa, all of them. I mean, we could go through all of them and go through the certifications. But, when you're mimicking nature and agricultural practices, our farms become massive air filters, right? And so they produce fresh oxygen. They get the atmospheric cycles back in their natural harmony. And so you have the carbon being put back into the soil, and then being in turn being uptaken by plants. You have the nitrogen from the atmosphere becoming our main fertilizer. Our farms all become these massive water filters, which a natural soil, or, nature soils store water and they filter water. And it stops erosion. It stops even organic fertilizers from going into the watersheds and changing pH or changing the microbiome in watersheds. We build wetlands in all of our farms. Like at the Highland Flats farm, we built 10 acres of wetlands that go, part of the farm's ecosystems. We also have wildlife corridors. I think if we go to the next slide, right, Mike, we have an overhead. And then or maybe you can pull that up from another presentation. And then there's a huge part of the farms about them supporting rural communities. I mean, the farms have had full-time employment on them for over 30 years. And we've had full-time employees on our farms for that long. And I'm really proud of the benefits that Young Living provides to our farm employees, the full-time benefits. They're amazing, amazing benefits. We have farm employees that have had, healthy, consistent incomes, wonderful benefits that you can compare to something like Boeing's. And, people have been able to put their kids through college on the incomes they've gotten from our farms. And, for people like me that love agriculture and want to be outside working with plants and soils, it's just an amazing thing to have a completely synthetic free, toxic free environment to farm in. And so that's it's work I'm incredibly proud of, and it's an honor to have the baton to keep that work going around the world. And then the farms themselves do incredible work supporting the local economies in a number of ways I won't detail tonight, but there's a lot of partnerships we have in our local economies. So I don't. We can pull up other presentations too, Rhonda, or we can do a Q&A or wherever you want to go from here.
Yeah, I would love to be able to let people ask questions if they have questions. So you guys, if you do have questions, um, you could unmute yourself or you could type them in the chat and we will present them to Brett. But Brett, I had a couple of questions, if you don't mind, as people are kind of getting their thoughts in order. Would you give just for those of us that don't know what reforestation means? Can you just give an overview of what that looks like? You
Yeah.
understand it, but not everyone else understands that.
Well, maybe I'll use an example of like the Kona sandalwood farm, and it was all clear cut for a cattle operation. And then Wade Lee, that Gary partnered with, was trying to restore the natural native forest that would have been there. And so there's a lot of really powerful before and after photos of that, that forest they built. And so, the reforestation in the simplest terms is just planting trees, right? But then, at Kona, it's a really complex forestry system that they have there. And I don't really like this word, but the sandalwood tree has to have, they call it a semi-parasitical tree. And that's not how I see it. It's a tree that needs partners around it. And it has to have these like, just like a in your garden, when you have these partner plants or these things you'd plant together that actually like benefit each other. But like the sandalwood has to have 7 different species planted all around it. And so instead of just like planting trees in rows and things like that, or like a plantation style, they've basically rebuilt these native forestry systems. It's the same with the Palo Santo in Ecuador, where it's been depleted. We grow Palo Santo on our farm, and we started in greenhouses, and then we have all these contracts with the government of Ecuador, and we go 6 hours south of the finca to this area called Rioja, and we've even brought brand partners there, and we plant in the forests, right? Same with the Hong Kwai, where it's endangered. We have nurseries, and then we bring these trees back into native forests, and then create, rebuild forests, rebuild forestry systems. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Um, would you also be willing, oh, when somebody's asked a question here, what do you do with driftwood?
So the driftwood was just with the Hong Kwai. So again, the Hong Kwai is an endangered species in Taiwan, but they have, if you've never been to Taiwan, it is the most amazing country. I mean, it's an island, but it's just mountain after mountain after mountain. And a lot of them get to as tall as 13,000 feet. So taller than anything I have here in Idaho. And they're really steep, but they have massive typhoons. And so naturally the trees get knocked off the mountains and they end up down into the different rivers. And so, they've been knocked off the mountain, and we have to get these very specialty permits that's the only way we can get Hong Kwai oil is from the driftwood that's found through these special permits in the rivers of Taiwan. And so it's a, it's an ethical way that we can harvest it. And, to me, though, I've always taken issue with this word sustainable for our practices, because to me, sustainability would be like a flat line. And to me, like the whole thing about regenerative ag or regenerative forestry is this whole principle where you're actually giving more than you're taking. And so, we're going to use these gifts of nature that benefit our lives, whether it's sandalwood or Palo Santo, but the net positive impact is that we're actually creating massive new forests, right? And so we're going to harvest some driftwood that's falling off the mountain naturally in Taiwan, but we have nurseries in our partnerships and we're reforesting Hong Kwai all over the mountains of Taiwan. So
I love the fact that the farms that I have been to, there nothing is wasted. Everything is used in some form or fashion. And one of the things that what I'm referring to for those of you that have never, experienced a farm or experienced this, when we were at the Northern Lights farm, when they were finished distilling the chips from the trees, they were using those, I'm going to call it like pellets. It would be like they were using them for heat, a heat source for stoves. And it's like everything you guys do such an amazing job of finding a purpose so that literally nothing is wasted. And that amazes me.
yeah, and that's another part that's just way beyond an organic certification, right? Is the utilization of the resources. And I mean, even like the wood chips in Highland Flats, they inoculate them with the microbiome they create in what's called a bioreactor, and they put it back into their soil, right? So everything just goes into, we like to call it a virtuous cycle, right? And a virtuous cycle is kind of what I'm saying. It's beyond sustainability. It's where things just get better and better and better. And you give back to nature, you give back to communities. And to me, that's actually like built into the fabric of nature, right? And part of like, I know Gary's vision and something I really relate with is not seeing ourselves as separate from nature, but really at one with nature. And then you work with nature as a partner. So all these resources can be given back to nature. They can be used for the pellets, like you said, that Gary bought that pellet plant and they actually go to really rural communities. And that's something that's in further development because the railroad stops at Fort Nelson and they have really a hard time finding different heat sources. And so those pellets help, communities actually be able to heat their homes and stuff. And so again, it's all a virtuous cycle because we all know what a vicious cycle is, right? So these are like like to say seed to sill creates all these virtuous cycles.
Well, that's the thing too. And this really struck me when we were in Ecuador and we saw the original school that
Yeah.
Gary and Mary drove by. Like when you see that school, and I'm sure like we can come up with pictures of it for everyone, but when you see that and then you go see, what their vision was and that it's come to fruition now and continues to grow and to flourish, literally, you think about a lot of the time companies will come into an area and it's really bad for that area, right? Like they decimate it's bad in so many ways, but Young Living is totally the opposite. Any community that they come into, they enrich that community and the people of that community. And I love that so much. And I think that's something that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, the community building is huge. And I mean, a lot of these communities too, there was not a lot being pumped in their economic lifeline or like, being able to have really stable incomes with benefits, and and it goes beyond the farms too, because every farm has a lot of vendors we work with, and they could be a number of different, services provided. And I mean, they're countless, honestly. I mean, I managing these budgets. And I mean, even when Gary started the construction projects he would start, it was just a huge bump to the local economies. And we've always made a huge priority to only use local businesses, even if they cost more. And so even if we could go further and get, reduced pricing, whether it was for like construction material or whether it's something we continually use. I mean, we've always prioritized local companies. And I mean, the communities we're in really, really, we're partners. We're not someone that's just coming to take resources and then leave after everything's depleted. It's kind of cool though, because it's the same way that soils work, soils and actually like balance biodiversity. It act like, when you look at monocropping, it always depletes soils. When you do regenerative ag and you're using the combination of cover crops, the soil, you get to a point, and people sometimes don't believe me about this, but you don't even use fertilizers anymore. And everything is an exchange. And then that it builds out in the insects, the beneficial insects, the mammals on our farms, and the humans and the communities we're in. And so the net positive impacts even leave the acreage of our farm, the boundaries of our farms, and impact the local communities. And I mean, and the incomes is huge too, but especially where we have like the foundation in Ecuador with the academy or partners. I don't know if you've seen the videos about the cooperative we partnered with in Morocco, and that's a really powerful one. And it's
I don't think so.
oh, that's a really great one. Hopefully we could get you that video too. And it's a whole cooperative of almost all the employees are women, that they set them up with bank accounts where they are finally able to have their own bank account and their own funds. It's a whole other really powerful initiative. But there is so much good that happens in these communities, and what I love about it is it's all measurable. It's not just like a PR thing that you could speak to, but if you ever tried to actually look for documentation of it, you find out it's a, what do we want to call it, like green screening or a virtue signal of some variety. And so I do think we need to get better though at measuring and documenting this, but that measurement's all available.
Well, that's one of the things, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to, I was really honored that you said you would come on tonight, is because there are so many things that are going on, I'm going to say behind the scenes at Young Living, that people have no idea.
Right.
And we really just need to do a better, I need to do a better job of sharing those things and all of that. There are a couple of more questions. Let me see here. Would it be okay to share a couple of documentaries about regenerative ag? I'm not sure if that means, Patsy, you can unmute if you want and tell us, or maybe you understand that more than I do, Brett, but you would like to share them. Oh, you want to share documentaries about regenerative ag with
And
us.
there's a huge movement going on, and there's some really good documentaries happening, and that's another thing, we're trying to partner with some of these groups. I don't know if I could divulge that yet or not, but we do have a regenerative agricultural summit happening in February at the Mount Nebo farm. And there's maybe one of them you're thinking of or not. We're trying to invite them. We're going to be premiering one of their newest documentaries right after we present at the Animals and Oil Conference. They're actually allowing us to do a premiere on their newest documentary. But yeah, anything you have, I love, and I love sharing, all the different books. One of my go-tos for entry-level people's, I really like Gabe Brown's work. His whole story is really powerful. Where, so anything you have, I love it. And that's one thing I love about seed to sill, regenerative ag. Gary's whole approach is it's it's constant improvement. You've never everything. I never saw Gary look at one job and say it was done. We're not going to revisit that. We're finished. He'd always revisit everything and try to constantly improve. And there's just no, yeah, kiss the ground, common ground. Yep, yep. We're trying to get them at our regenerative ag conference. Yep.
Thank you, Patsy, for bringing that up. That's great. Okay, there's another question. I don't know if you can see the chat or not, Brett, but it says, is it true Young Living won't use the land that has been chemically altered in the last 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, the most recent example we have of that is the Okinawa farm. And that's, That's a really powerful story because it's actually basically in or borders the Yambaru National Park. And so we were only able to get it because our connections through Dr. Wu, a research scientist we have in Okinawa. But before we bought that, we had to do a bunch of core samples of the soil, and we did 400 different tests for possible contamination. And I mean, these could be petrochemicals, these could be all the different forever chemicals, obviously ag chemicals, and so yeah, it was super comprehensive. And that's, maybe that's something else I should put in these presentations. And then this wasn't, and we could do another presentation too. I just thought this was one that we just wanted to look at organic certifications, but we have, how many presentations do we have, Michael? But if we knew the content you wanted to target, I mean, we have it. I have all those tests of the soil analytics we did and all the contaminations we look for. But there were literally 400 different contaminants we look for. But again, these are things I could proudly document. It's a shame when things are just kind of hearsay, or there's so many what do we call them? People that wish us ill or want to criticize us or have their own agenda of wanting to put us in a poor light. And I think sometimes that's the loudest voice, and we don't do a good enough job documenting and defending the good work we've always done. And so, I mean, these questions, I'm happy to come on with your team when we can make the schedules align and we could actually target all these questions, because that would be a fun one to bring on everything we have from Okinawa.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be great.
I think the interesting thing, Brett, is Rhonda and I have been around a while, you know that. And over the years, you learn things and you hear things and you experience things and all that. And we always heard and understood about the better than organic and yada, yada, yada. And it's easy to pass off and, all that. And then one of our new builders simply asked, "Hey, Rhonda, is there some place where it says that there are, our farm's organic or our products organic or whatnot?" And quite frankly, Rhonda and I had no idea that there was an organic certification on the farms. And we kind of gave that explanation, like we could, used to be on the Seed and Seal website and say, hey, we do this, we do this, we do this, things like the soil not being treated with chemicals for X amount of years and things like that. So it's kind of like news to us when somebody else, another diamond, shot us a picture of the Mount Nebo organic certification. I'm like, oh, heck, we didn't. So that's where this whole thing came from, was just like a simple question of like, is it better organic? And then, I'm glad that we're organic. I'm kind of like you. I think it's a low baseline, but it means a lot to people to just know that it is. And it's, learning things and going back to, when you've been around a while, you kind of forget
Yeah.
where you
Well,
came from and what's important to new people.
if another company though was telling me that they were organic and even regenerative and even did all this conservation work, and even their agriculture alone was a form of conservation, and they were just like, but trust me, you would be like, you know what I mean? And that
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
be a good position to be in. And I think there's a lot of good work to be done here though, documenting all this. And I mean, starting with the organic certifications, and we have a lot of other really good documentation we've done of proofs that like show that it's so much far beyond just like the baseline of an organic certification, and that those really are like our foundational values. But if it's not, I mean, I know really skeptical people too, like really skeptical people, and anything it's fair that they want documentation and proof of. That's a very fair ask, you know? And
Yeah.
so maybe we start a little side project documenting all this and layering it, because we have another. Do you know the ROC certification? So
What does
ROC
RC stand
stands
for?
for regenerative organic certification, and they're a good certifying body. But like, we've been engaging with them, and we would like to get those certifications because it's a level up from just a baseline organic one. and it shows that you're doing things for soil health and conservation, and we're even way beyond their standards, like way beyond. It would be so easy for us to get. Another example is good manufacturing practices, GMP. I mean, we're in our distilleries, on our farms and our labs, we're way beyond GMP, like way beyond. But for me, just to say that to someone that maybe heard really negative stories about Young Living, I mean, they would be like, sure, then why don't you have it? If you're way beyond GMP. And then sometimes there's another complexity of our products not being certified organic, because a lot of them are blends and they're from several different sources and several different countries of origin. And then to get all that, even the country of origin can be incredibly complex with all the different countries regulatory requirements. And then to build all that into a product that in the end ends up with an organic certification, the fact that it is organic, that's the easy part. The paperwork and I mean, that's actually the monumental work that has to happen, not what's happening in physical reality. And that's something that a lot of people don't, if you hadn't tried to get it done, it's a really easy question. Well, why isn't it certified organic? And it's actually like the complexities in that with some of our blends it's an awful lot of work and cost. And it's not that we're opposed to that work and cost, but it's, yeah. So I've done what I can do in managing the farms. And again, we want to get the ROC certifications. We want to get the Fair Wild certifications. We want to get the Forward Stewardship certifications. But I wonder what we can do now with building a package of all the certifications and like the documentation we have for the native pollinators. That's something we have with the university, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many things that are, like I said, that are happening that no one knows about that I want to do a better job of getting that information out. Um, I, Someone asked the question about how many acres is an average farm.
Oh, okay. Well, I stopped doing math in sixth grade. I got to long division and count me out. So no, I'm kidding. That's some of the farms, like, so the Okinawa farm is only 10 acres. So that might be like, wow, well, how would that work? It works because when we looked at that farm, there's an entire network of organic farms that are in a cooperative there with us, right? The Finca Botanica is over 4,000 acres. The farm in Mount Nebo, 1,700 acres. Skyrider Ranch is 18,000 acres. Highland Flats is 760 acres. So it's, I mean, an average on that.
Yeah, it'd be a good size.
It varies a lot, doesn't it? But that's the thing. If when people haven't been, they don't have any idea.
Right. Yeah. Well, the farm in France, it's actually a cooperative that Gary started with, the Landell family. And so we own some of the property, but then there's a whole network. The lavender, there's some years they had to make 70,000 kilos for Young Living's needs. And so, and that's where I've wanted to do a better job is highlight the standards that govern our partnerships. Because, when people get down to the math of, wait a minute, maybe they felt, or maybe it, at times has been over positioned that the oils come from only our farms. But if you do the math on that, that's not how it works out. There's a whole entire system of partnerships we have and cooperatives we work with that, that's the real story. And how that's actually governed is by, myself, Chris Packer, that you might know, Nicholas Landell. They have a sourcing team that's the farm team. The farm team is the sourcing team. And so we have people in every region. So we have someone named Layla that's in France that works directly for Nicholas Landell. We have Diana Cardenas that's over Asia, but they all report to us. And so when we look at new farms, it's measured against the people governing it are people like myself and Chris and Nicholas that were trained directly by Gary and managed Young Living farms. And so that's, to me, another part that maybe was called into question, well, what percent of the oil does Young Living's farms actually produce? And then what percent is done by partners and cooperatives? Because the reality of a supply chain like this is that a lot of it's done through partnership, a lot of it's done through cooperatives. But to me, the bigger question is, how are those standards governed? Like, the farm in Taiwan, that's a partner. And a lot of these farms, it's actually impossible for a US company to own land in some of these countries. It's simply not allowed with their these different international laws, right? So
Yeah, it's quite the network.
yeah, and there's an incredible amount of nuance to being a US based company working with all these sources around the world. So
Yeah.
But the standards are all the same. That's the thing that people have to understand, that the partner farms have the same, or working under the same standards that Young Living's own farms are using.
exactly, and that's the governing body for seed to sill.
Right.
The governing body for the organic certifications might be EcoCert or whatever we can do in that country. But for all the farms, we have a seed to sill audit. And maybe that'd be something interesting to share. How we
Sure.
actually,
Absolutely.
what's the governing body for seed to sill?
Yeah, I think that's perfect, actually.
Michael, are you getting down these other slides we can do for the next presentations? If you want, this can turn into a series, because I'd really like to work with groups like yours that this is something they'd like more documentation, or build more work here.
Oh, I think so. I think I would venture to guess everyone on here would be delighted
Well, it
if
doesn't
that
have
were
to be,
available.
we can bring other special guests. Like, Orlando Pacheca is our lead agronomist, and he's the one that brought in the rosewood partner in Brazil, right? And so there's, that the hemp farming is another really interesting topic. I mean, there's a world of things to discuss, and then maybe because I didn't have a lot of time to put in this presentation, and I really only focused on one part and was just doing an overview. But if we had like a month to work on some of this, we could get a lot more detailed and provide a lot more documentation, and happy to do it.
Yeah, I would love that. I think everybody would love that. Yeah, and yes, 100%. Um, Thank you for all of the information. I don't want to keep you longer. I know that you've had a ton of travel and you're getting ready to travel some more and a lot of things going on. But may I just ask you one last thing, Brett? Is there anything off the top of your head that you could share with us that really impacted you with the time that you spent, that Gary was your mentor?
Yeah, there's so many stories, and so to you know, there's a story I always like to tell about Gary called the flood. That's kind of like, because all of this, it's so vast. You can, like, in an hour of time, all you can really do is like, well, for example, you know, and so I can provide examples of things, but in the future we could get a lot more in depth on whatever the topic is. But yeah, I have it, because I didn't start working with Gary till I was 26, and so I dropped out of college. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was a scam. I'd become a river guide on the Salmon River. I'd always been into agriculture, though. I grew up on an organic farm. A lot of people don't know, and we had organic alfalfa and orchards, and I'd started farming at a really young age, and and my mom's a total health nut, if you know who my mom is. And so all this, health and wellness, natural health and wellness products, eating organically, that's how I grew up. So, and then I started my own adventure in agriculture, which maybe that's another thing. But so I'd had jobs, okay. I'd gone to college, I'd been a river guide. I used to work at graveyards in Oregon. I worked at this whole series of graveyards, and a little known fact about me, for 4 years in Eugene and Portland and all these different places. And there's a whole agricultural side of that story too. And anyhow, maybe this is just, I'm trying to provide some context of who I might have been when the story happened. But, my mom was working with Gary in Ecuador, and she told Gary about me. He's like, well, Brett does organic farming. He's, passionate about it. It's like it's his thing. And I got the job offer, and I was, anyhow, enough about me, but, or who I was before I started working with Gary. But, how most people look at work, it's like fits in a pretty tight little box, and it's not, generally it's not people's passions, or a lot of people's it's not, it's something they do, and they even say it's not my real life. Have you ever heard people say that? Well, it's work, it's not my real life. And it's so, like, when I started working with Gary, this was like his life. This was like, you know and so I'd be working with them to till midnight all the time, and I was just like, who is this guy? And I'd get kind of frustrated sometimes too, because I just wasn't used to that, right? And the only way I could get out of working till midnight or 2 in the morning is if I said I had a date with my girlfriend, which that's another story in itself. But that was something you'd be like, okay, you got a date? That's fair. Anyhow, I just never been around someone that had that much drive, or like a man on a mission like that. And that, his work was his passion, was his art, was his thing. But anyhow, I guess maybe there's, living in Oregon for a while where it rains so much, I thought I'd seen the rain. But one day we were working on the farm and Gary was down in the clinic, and the storm came in and caused this massive, like, catastrophic flooding. And it flooded the reservoir there. It started washing out all the roads. And Gary called me. He's like, what's happening to the farm? I'm like, all the roads are washing out. And when I'd been working with them till like midnight and beyond, we were trying to build the original road that went into Finca, and it kept on washing out because there was the first event coming at the Finca, first big event. And so I'm like, I think we need to get all the employees home, because I don't think they're going to be able to get off the farm. I think all the roads will wash completely out. And so the reservoir overflowed. It started eroding the dam. And then, like, normally just these little places where there wasn't even like running water except for a couple times a year, there were like 50-foot rivers. It was literally insane. I'd never seen anything like it. I'd never seen rain like this. And then Gary drove as fast as he could from the clinic in Guayaquil and met me at this main big place where the road was washing out, and it was like a raging river. And most of the employees, and there's about 50 of them this time, they lived in Guayaquil, and Gary wanted to make sure that they got home. That, I'm like, well, Gary, they're going to be spending the night at the farm with me if we don't get them off the farm. And so he raced up, and then he was on one side of this big river that normally wouldn't be there. I was on the other side. And it was like, if you can imagine, it was like so loud from this monsoon rain, you couldn't hear each other, and we were yelling. And if you know how Gary usually kept his hair, it was all washed down in his face, and he looked different. And he starts yelling at me, and I don't know what he's saying. And he starts wading across this big 50-foot raging river, and I don't know what he's doing. And he's like hunkered down low, and the center of gravity's low, and he's trying to not get pushed down, because if the water would have pushed you down, it actually got worse and like looked more like rapids. And again, I was a river guide. You could have took a raft through what was downstream of us. This is an exaggeration. And so it did seem kind of like dangerous. And so he came across, and then he put his arms out like this, and he started making these chains of the employees. And so they would link arms, on both sides, both arms. They would hook elbow to elbow with them. And he got way down low, and then he made these human chains. And he would like maybe take 4 to 6 guys across at a time. And he just went back and forth and back and forth until every single employee got to the other side of this river, where their families were now waiting for them to get him home. And I just watched, in all honesty. I was just like, what is happening here? You know what I mean? And like, he told me to go back to the farm and get a ladder because we might need it if the road blew out. And anyhow, I just was like, that's kind of the moment that it just struck me. I was like, okay, there's something very different happening here. This is not like a job like you're used to. This is someone that would put his life on his line for his people and do anything to make sure that they, got home to their families. And, and we have the employees that when I started there 17 years ago at the Finca, those same employees are still there. Right. And so if there was one moment that I knew that was part of something that was unlike anything I'd ever been part of, that was the moment where I was just like, wow, okay. I mean, most people would have been like, yeah, I'm sorry, it's a natural disaster and we'll figure it out tomorrow. And, so
It wasn't his way, was it?
no, not at all. I mean, and
You know, it's cool.
that's the way he
How
did
many of
it.
those, how many stories is there about Gary Leonard just like that? Not just
Yeah,
your story. There's so many of you guys have so many Gary stories that are unbelievable. I
right.
mean, they're believable, but they're just crazy, right?
Well, and that's just me picking one because there's a bunch from Winter Harvest, and there's some I really like from Croatia. There's some I really like from Northern Lights. But to me, that just has a whole different element to it because it was outside of just standard operations.
Sure,
This was a
sure.
very unique and unexpected situation. And I mean, Gary showed who he was and what he was made of. He could
Well,
have,
and he must have been exhausted. I mean,
yeah.
that's hard. That would be exhausting to go keep going through that water like that.
And
So,
I can picture it so clearly, and hopefully I painted a picture that where you can kind of imagine. And I mean, just like rain so loud you can't even just shouting and just like that, and then and that's because we were both yelling at each other, not knowing what we were going to do, and everyone was scared. Like everyone was.
yeah.
I was scared. Everyone was scared, and then Gary just waded in the water and got as low as he could. He was way down. He was way down in there, and just yeah, just it was something else. And
I
so
thought you were going to tell me he pulled the plug out of the bottom of the river and
well, I ended up. There's more to that story, but it's not. It's my story, not Gary's story. What ended up happening to me that night? Because yeah, I never. Yeah, well, maybe
So,
that's.
so you're going to tell us or you're not?
Oh, I can because
Okay, yeah, we want to hear.
well, I was with Gary's best friend Eldon Niddle, Nancy Niddle's husband, and this other guy named John Dorick, and we were trying to repair a bunch of stuff at the farm and trying to do damage control because Gary got everyone home and then he left. And then we came back to that road, and if again, it's trying to paint the picture, but it was somewhere with like a little canyon where we had to put a bunch of cement culverts and then build a road across. And so, with that much water going through, it kind of acted like a dam. That's why the water got so high and went 50 feet across, maybe more. And then when we got back down there, the entire thing had blown completely apart and then funneled down in this really narrow channel. And then was even more, then it was really like it was a river you could have rafted down. And so and Eldon, and I was 26 years old. Eldon was in the 70s. John was in his late 60s. And so we had to go get a bunch of extension ladders and lash them together and flop them over this really tight little ravine that had formed once that road had blown out. And I had to help them both crawl across these ladders. And then Gary came back with the truck and then got us all.
Oh
So,
gosh.
yeah, yeah.
The defining night.
Yeah. I mean, but that was that. I mean, I just remember looking at Gary and being like, who is this guy? Like, what is happening right now? It was cool. It was cool. And then just like the way his hair looked and the way he sounded like yelling in that crazy monsoon rain. And it was intense. It was intense.
That's awesome. So from every time that you or whoever comes on in the future for this continuing series of farm, of all the Young Living farm things, we need a story. Okay,
Yeah.
like that's got to be the thing. Everybody's got to tell us a story because we love the stories.
Well, let us know, and we're happy to do it. And I can join, or we could ask Nicholas Landell or Chris Packer to join, or other people. And then I think we could build a way more comprehensive